Okay. Okay. And I'm going to go to here. Let's see. Where are we? Slideshow. Be right with you. There we are. So we're talking about parenting a teen, kicking it up a notch, which is always an interesting challenge because parents don't like to be told that they're bad, but they do need to begin to grow and improve and develop if they're going to in today's world. Certainly from the day when we were kids, life has changed a great deal. So that's really where we want to start from. It's not an indictment or an accusation of bad parenting. It's more a function of growing and building and developing one's parenting. I'll tell you a little bit about me. This happened to be a picture that I had when I was on doing some TV interviews on a regular basis. Dan Bazil started out as just a TV interviewer, and he became a pretty good friend. I am an educational psychologist by training. I then spent 30 years as a leadership and executive coach across the United States and into Europe. I'm a former school psychologist and director of special education. Um, and we did develop a first of its kind gifted education program in, hang on a minute, I gotta move something here. In Arizona. And as I said, I've been on multiple TV programs. Um, and we did have a really great team developing our program and process. Um, so let's start from the premise that whether you wanted it or accepted it or not, parenting is leadership. And you may not have thought of it that way, but it's relatively true and valid. Um, and a couple of the things to keep in mind. Parenting, as I said before, has changed a great deal. When we were growing up, very commonly our parents um, were commanders and demanders, and whatever they said went. And society has changed, and inevitably you've noticed that. One of the key elements, and I began to notice this when I was reading about leadership in the military. Colin Powell, for example, as a leader, is not authoritarian. He's not demanding. He is much more supportive and encouraging. And I think the same thing needs to apply to parenting. If you think, for example, of the best boss that you ever had, you knew what they were like. The best bosses are not the commanders and demanders, but rather the ones who facilitate and guide and lead. Um, you may have had a boss who used some of those negative traits. So that's an element to be thinking about as well. Now, let me move on to another important element. I've been reading and studying and learning and observing parenting for quite a while now. And what I've seen and noticed is that um, there are basically kind of two types of parents, two kinds of parents. There are parents who believe that teenagers simply will not and cannot change, and that's just the way they are. And then there are those who believe that, oh, it's just a phase, they'll grow out of it. And then, in my expectation, the reason you're here tonight, there's you, a parent continually searching for ways to strengthen and build their teen's happiness and success. And let me pause there and make a point that's extremely powerful. I don't know if I'm the first one in the class to figure this out or the last one in the class, but what we've discovered is that there's a very close tie-in between happiness and success. If you think about the people who are happy, they are almost always successful. And if you think about the people who are unhappy, they're almost always unsuccessful, and vice versa. So early on in our programming, we started focusing on this whole idea and issue of success and happiness being tied together. Let me start with a key point right off the bat that's pretty powerful. All human behavior is successful at fulfilling some need or some desire, whether it's conscious or subconscious. You know those days when you ask yourself why my teenager did that, whatever it was, and you're trying to figure out why? Well, somewhere in their head, there is a reason behind it. And it takes a little bit of thinking, but it's not usually not that difficult. And we'll get into that in just a few minutes. I will also tell you I've made that statement to many people in recent years, and a lot of them will argue that that's just wrong, and they are wrong, unfortunately. All human behavior is fulfilling or living out some need or desire. The heart of what we want to talk about tonight revolves around these four items. In order to get through and react and interact with your teenager, first thing you need to do is to listen and then pause and then think and then ask. Because by asking, you'll gain a whole lot more understanding. We all have a tendency when a teenager makes some ridiculous comment to us that we want to jump on them and be very accusatory and argumentative and so on. And we want to suggest that you change that model. Ask will change almost every aspect and element of your relationship with your teenager. And here's why. It's a change in approach. Instead of inviting your teen, or rather allowing and inviting your teen's thinking, bringing with it actual respect, which is something that most teenagers are really always looking for. Let me give you a couple suggested questions. And there are wide and long list of questions that you can come up with. This first one is one that I've used for years, and I find it to be extremely helpful. When a teenager says something to you that's either outrageous or unfair or unrealistic or off the wall, if you simply reply and respond in a very low key, unemotional manner and say to them, well, that's an interesting point. Tell me more, please. And then wait for their response. And then the most important part of this step is the follow-up. The second step is, tell me a little bit more so that I'm clear. Why is that important right here, or meaningful or relevant right here? And again, the listening element is so powerful, so valuable and important. Another question you might use, and again, there's a wide array of them. It's probably more the attitude that you portray or use going in. But you could easily say, when they do something outrageous, I'm not sure why you did that. What did you want me to do or not do? And I'll give you a living example that I saw a couple of years ago. I was working with an engineer who was getting ready to promote a mid-20s-year-old engineer to a new position, to an elevated promotion. And a couple days after that, this young guy had a temper tantrum on the shop floor. And what I suggested his boss ask him is, what do you think you accomplished by that? Because far too often, people don't realize what they really did with that kind of action or behavior. So that after you've done that, after they explain, oftentimes it may be a little bit empty, but then follow up with, tell me more so I can see your point or understand or learn. And as I said before, we have a lot of questions that I can send to you if you'd like. Just email me and I'll get back to you. There are so many benefits from this whole process of asking questions rather than telling. Just by asking, you raise their self-esteem because it makes them feel as if you value their thinking. Secondly, you actually fertilize your thinking. I think I said that a minute or so ago. Very often teenagers respond or react because that's what they heard somebody else say. But when you reply and ask a question, you're fertilizing their thinking the next time around. Let's talk about homework. And I want to get some input here. Sherry, are you audio? Sherry, are you there?
Yep.
Okay. I want to take you through, I want to take all of us through. It would be helpful if some of these other people weren't on mute, but we'll move ahead with it anyhow. When you ask your boys about doing their homework and they refuse or deny or reject, what are some of the usual issues that they that you hear from them?
I can't remember.
Okay. Well, here's what
What do
happens
they-
when you, the key issue I want to get at here is when you hear a denial of doing homework, I don't want to, and so on and so forth. If you think about it, it's really dramatically more enlightening. Why would anyone not want to do their homework? Number one, they don't know how to do it. Number two, it gets in the way of their social calendar. Number three, they don't want to give in to you or to the teacher or somebody like that. They have other priorities. So the question then becomes, what might you do? Well, you got several options there. One of the ones that shows up is just leave them alone. Just walk away and don't worry about it. Secondly, you might also walk through, and Sherry, you and I talked about this before, but walk them through what might happen if they don't get through the homework that's being asked of them. But the key issue I want to bring you back to here is, as I said before, we are all predictable. Your spouse and your partner and your teenagers, we are all predictable. So if you've had them for 12, 13, 14, 15 years, they're pretty predictable. So if you know what they're going to say, then you can prepare for their reply from there. Questions, comments so far? Okay. Anybody experience these kinds of issues, back talk or mouthing off or insolence or whatever, things like that?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Is that
Just a
Sherry?
few minutes ago,
What?
just before this presentation.
Okay. So think about why they might do that. Number one, these are teenagers. So it may be the case that they don't want to give in to their parent because they're trying to show their parents, you can't control me, you won't control me. one probability. A couple other thoughts. I know you and you screwed up the world and it's your fault, so don't bother to tell me. And then another one is they're trying to show you their new, growing, evolving, strong self-esteem. And I think I started to say this before. Self-esteem is one of the things that's probably one of the most important elements of teenagers. The most important element in all human performance, teenager or adult, is their own self-esteem, what they really believe that they're capable of and can do. And I think that's a pretty important element. So when you get that kind of back talk, you have several elements. First of all, listen. And maybe reply with that second question I gave you before. What did you want to get out of me by replying like that? By the way, show no emotionality when you are replying to that kind of back talk from a teenager. You could very easily say, I think I see your point. Tell me a little bit more. And what you're really doing by asking that, it's a really powerful evolving change because you're probably approaching them differently than they ever heard before. And that's pretty powerful, pretty important, pretty meaningful. That's one area to begin to take a look at. Let's take a look at another one. School issues. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Leslie Kelly. So if the kid turns around and says you will not do something, like full-fledged defiance, what should response be other than I'm the adult, you will not talk to me today?
I would throw that one away. You know why? You've probably already used it. I'm sorry?
Oh, no, go ahead.
You've probably already used it a half a dozen times and it didn't work.
About the second or third time.
Okay. But my point more than anything is approaching it differently. Literally saying, that's an interesting point. Tell me more about that. And to get them engaged in a conversation. Now, will they jump on it that first time? Very possibly not. But what you're establishing is a new level or kind of communication. And that's really what you're looking for there, to open the door to more communication. Key element, don't get emotional. Because ultimately, if you think about what's going on in their head, they're looking, whether they realize it consciously or subconsciously, they are looking to grab your attention and to show you, you can't control me. So that's a very important element. And I'm glad you said that, because that's an element that I think many, many parents go through. And the issue has to be, don't exchange emotion with emotion. But the issue then becomes, and again, it depends on the issue, whether it's homework or work around the house or going out socially or whatever else it is, think about the reasoning beneath that. And by the way, while I'm on that thought, never say to them, well, I know just what you're thinking, or I understand exactly what you're saying. Because the minute you do that, you will have lost them. If you ever had an argument with a husband or a spouse or a partner, and you said to them, I know just what you're thinking, you can be assured that you lost it right there. Because nobody likes to be told, I understand just what you're thinking. So don't get into that whole conversation. Just let it go, walk away. And if it goes on long enough, clearly this is an age and a stage where you can begin to take things away. Things like Wi-Fi or tablet or video game or cell phone or whatever else. Kids need to understand that you're in charge without you having to say it. Am I making sense?
Yes. So we're just supposed to ask them questions and then take stuff away, but do we need to explain why we're doing it?
You could. I wouldn't give them more than a sentence. When you can show me some respect, you can get your phone back.
So
And
I do that and they don't care.
Well, that's probably because they've got too much of everything.
I've taken all their electronics away and they don't care.
So what you've got there is a fight. It's a battle back and forth. And the question becomes who's going to
Right.
win? And that's where, again, you need to get into that question asking mode. And that's where you're going to get more information. If they don't answer your question, then you walk away. But again, the key issue in all of these is unemotional replies and responses. That's the key. That's the bottom line. That's what you really want to get done. And as I said before, I think none of these things, pretty much, a lot of these things are not going to work instantly or the first time out, but continue to approach it as unemotionally as you possibly can. Again, don't feed their need. That was almost poetic, wasn't it? Don't feed what they're trying to get from you. Make sense?
Yes.
It does. I have another question that may or may not be on topic, and if it's not, it should be saved for a different webinar. I will understand.
Go ahead.
So what if you're a step parent and dealing with a defiant child that just doesn't want to listen to you or their actual parent because they only want to have allegiance for the other parent that they're not with at the current time?
And your question is?
Well, I mean, are there maybe other steps that should be evolved or still the same thing? Just keep
So,
asking questions.
is their natural parent with you?
Yes.
Okay. And do you get a level of not authoritative, but emotional support from him?
Yes.
Okay. Then I would suggest what you really need to do there is to have the three of you sit down together and then follow the questions that I've talked about, along with the ones that I'm going to send to you as soon as you email me. There are lots and lots of questions that you can ask, that you can get into to really get them to understand. Again, keep in mind, and I'll get to this in just a couple minutes, but I'll tell you now. If you haven't read the book, The Teenage Brain, get a copy of that and read that. It's written by a mother who's a neurologist. And it's very enlightening because what she talks about in there is the bubbling soup going on inside a teenage brain. It's just bubbling and boiling, and they say things and they do things, and then 5 minutes later they may change. I had a conversation with a friend of mine a while back, and she had a pretty high performing daughter, and yet what she heard from this daughter regularly, not just once, but regularly, she would suggest or something, and the daughter would instantly say no. And then honestly, 30 seconds later, she'd come back and say, well, okay. So what's going on in the teenage brain, it's a whole lot of upset and misdirection and so on. Also keep in mind, if you remember back to the day when you fell in love, emotions are not logical. Emotions override logic every time. So what you're dealing with this teenager is emotions and basically the fingers being pointed at you, even though you're not the problem. And I have a stepdaughter of my own, and I was still trying to work things out when she was 22 years old, and we started when she was 12.
I feel for you.
What?
Said I feel for you.
Oh, we got past it. We got past it. She's a pretty good kid now. She's only 32, so there's still time.
Oh, wow.
What? Okay, let's talk about drugs and alcohol abuse, because this has the potential to be a big one. And again, I want to take you back to the think about it issue. Why would any kid, 12, 13, 15, 16, even 17, get into drugs or alcohol?
Trauma, or it's fun.
What was the first one you said? Drama?
Trauma.
Oh, trauma. Good answers, both. Yep. Yep.
Following the crowd.
Say again?
I would say seeing a member of their family abuse drugs, alcohol.
Right.
Yes, good answer, good probability. What else?
Peer pressure.
That's an interesting one from the standpoint that, is it peer pressure or is it they just want to be like their peers?
Yes. They want to
So-
be like everyone else
Yep,
in
Yep.
their groups.
yep. So you've got those laid out. What might you do? And again, what you can do is to go back through most of the questions that we've already talked about. What is it about drugs or alcohol that you get from that? What does it do for you? And then again, the follow-up is the most important question. How does that make you feel? What do you feel after the fact? Do you feel like you're much more a member of the tribe now, or the group, or the social group, or whatever? And again, just keep following those questions. Again, what you're doing very often is enlightening, getting them to think most often. When kids act or interact like that, they're going along with the crowd just because that's what everybody else is doing.
What if they just get smart and they say it just makes them feel good?
Oh, first thing I jump on there is, well, tell me more about that. Tell me how that feeling good really works for you. And then maybe take it a step further. What might we do to make you feel even better? And many of you have probably heard and seen the issue of the parent who finds their kid smoking, and they make the kid smoke an entire pack of cigarettes. Now, I'm not sure I would do that with alcohol nor with drugs. But again, you gotta lay it out and keep it going and keep the conversation going. You may not be able to stop the drugs or the alcohol abuse immediately without being extremely authoritative, but at least you've got some thinking going on. Because the biggest issue you've got with drugs and alcohol is when they leave the house, they're on their own. So you need to have installed in their thinking that decision-making process of their own. That's really what you're looking for there. And from what I've heard, I'm not sure I'm going to confess to it, but from what I've heard, a good drunk for a teenager can be very behavior shaping. As in, I'll never do that again, I was so sick. So those are some thoughts and ideas that you can start from. Okay, now we're up to one of my favorites. Everybody heard of executive function deficits?
Yep.
The first time I heard that, I had to go back and reread it. And what it really is, it has struck me for many, many years that we are a society who believe that as soon as we can label something, we know what to do about it. When in fact, we don't. We truly don't. The issue of executive function, whether it's focus, time management, organization, and so on and so forth, whatever they are, if you break them, if you lump them all together, most kids don't have all of those issues. But if you pick out the ones, the 2 or 3, or even 1 or 2 that are most important and focus on them and begin to make some changes. I've known and seen and worked with kids where they didn't have the capacity to change what they were doing. But here's where change can be brought in very easily. Most kids that I have known and worked with have a pretty good idea that they really want to do well in school and in life and so on and so forth. So I don't think that's anything that you need to worry about. I'm sorry, a poor choice of words. You need to take advantage of the fact that they really do want to do well. And you do that by identifying what I have come to refer to as micro goals. A micro goal is something that is so small that you could almost laughably fulfill it. As an example, if you've got a teenager whose focus is quite poor, ask, and again, go back to our premise, ask him or her, what would you like to get done in the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Get a commitment and then send them off to do it. The smaller you break down that task, the greater the probability of fulfilling it. Now, if they're only good for 3 minutes instead of 10, that's okay, because you're still getting 3 minutes of positive, and then reinforce and complement that, and then go back to it. Would you like to go for 3 more minutes? Great, go for it, and I'll be right back. And that whole process is called behavior shaping. And I will send you, if you'd like, a piece that we have on successive approximations, which is how you approach behavior shaping. And I will tell you, within the last month, I found another name for that people are recommending for issues like executive function deficits. So the issue is beginning to identify little tiny short range goals, get them to achieve or pursue or fulfill them, and then even when they come close, complement and reinforce what they did. But the key issue is try to get rid of the executive function deficit label and focus on issues of, is it time management? Is it organization? Is it motivation? Whatever else it may be, focus on that and really try to build and develop in little tiny bites. As Sherry and I were talking about before, habits build slowly over time. And what you're looking to do here is to build a new habit in your teenager. Questions, comments? I'll take that as a no. Okay. These are some of the things that we had talked about presenting in this workshop. So let's start here. Lack of focus, we just talked about. And literally there are people, there are kids who simply can't focus for long enough periods of time. So that's something, again, going back to that issue of micro goals and little tiny behavior shaping issues. That's where you really want to go after you've gotten the buy-in and the motivation from your teenager. Underachievement is almost always an issue of self-esteem. Not always, but pretty darn close. They just don't believe that they're capable of it, so they manage to procrastinate and so on. And I will tell you, by the way, I've seen that in gifted kids that I have worked with, because their self-esteem is lower than you might expect, and they just manage to procrastinate and put it off and never get to it, and always tell themselves that if I really put my heart into it, I could have done it. The pandemic is a very, very interesting one. You know, I read and listened to all of the media reports for a long time through most of the pandemic. And toward the end of it, probably about 2 or 3 months ago, I read an article that was really interesting. And what they said was that for many, many people, a statistically significant group of people, they actually enjoyed the time with their kids at home. Now, certainly, you know, we're all going to have different responses to that. But my point there, one of the points is the fact that there are many media reports that get blown out of proportion because they sell airtime or newsprint. So be conscious of that, and be conscious also of the fact that you are their role model. And that's a very important, significant point to keep in mind. You're their role model. So if you show overreaction, or the school or the government or whoever else is at fault, the more you point the finger at that, the less your role modeling will accomplish. There was a quote from a movie, which I won't get into in any great depth right now, but the quote that I always thought of was, Mom always said there's a way to get there. Mom always said there's a way. And I think that's an extremely powerful element to begin to move toward. Let's talk about building your resilient team. I've been watching, observing, and noting for quite a while. And the two things that every teenager needs is resilience and resourcefulness. Resilience obviously means getting back up after you've been knocked down, and resourcefulness is creative thinking to get to whatever that new solution might be. I have talked to college professors who've told me that they have had college students who've never been challenged before until they get to college. And the kids literally emotionally just collapse and they don't know what to do. They are absolutely without answer. So my suggestion is, don't let your teen be one of them. Allow them to make mistakes. If you have not read the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, I'd suggest that you get it. You can find it used on the internet for less than $10. It's not a long book. It's extremely enlightening and powerful. Allow your kids to make mistakes. If they never make mistakes, they're never going to learn how to bounce back. Encourage them to question themselves. Ask themselves. Encourage them to ask for help when they need it. Rely on their own thinking. But and this is the key one. It's okay to make mistakes, but if you keep making the same mistake over and over again, you're going nowhere. So you have to guide them in replanning and regrowing. I'm going to skip that page. I'm going to go back to it. Micro goals we talked about. I'm going to skip that one. Personal leadership is one of the things that we strive to work on and for and with our kids recognizing that ultimately, personal leadership, whether we call it that or not, is what leads or guides anyone through life. If they've got it, they're that much more successful and powerful. And if they don't have it, they're going to collapse and fall much earlier in life. Question, comment? So what's to happen from here? No parent can accomplish everything from this moment on. So a month from now, we would like to convene and provide a discussion forum to talk about your issues and to develop strategies to most effectively continue advancing your team toward their and your success and happiness. And that brings us back to reality. Questions, comments, observations, or requests before we wrap up?
That was some really helpful content. Thank you.
Good. If you don't have it, here's my email address, just to make sure, so that I can send you information after the fact. It is Coach Steve at launch-your-life.com. Let me say that again. Coach Steve at launchyourlife.com. I thought we had some pretty good conversation here tonight, and I'd like to hope we can get back to it in the not too distant future. Anybody else want to add anything? Sherry? Were you-
Is there a way that you could write out your email? Because I'm still not getting it. Can you do that in the chat box?
I wouldn't know how to
Or
do
you
that.
can write out your email.
Let me give you another option. Give me yours and I'll get to you very quickly.
But
Go ahead.
thank you. I really appreciate your help tonight.
You're gonna give me your email?
Oh, you want mine? Okay, it's Sherry, Cheri, Ireland, IRELAND at yahoo.com.
So that's 2 I's in a row, huh?
Yes.
Okay. I will ship that out to you by tomorrow morning at the latest.
Okay, thank you.
All right, it's been a pleasure. Any other comments, questions, concerns, complaints?
Nope, this has been enlightening. Thank you very much.
Very good. All right. Nice to hear from you. Good night, all.
Sorry, been in,
What?
I said sorry, been in and out.
Okay.